Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our expert witnesses for being with us today and sharing your time with this committee in this important study. My first few questions will be for Ms. Exner-Pirot concerning your expertise on critical minerals and the role that plays in our defence sector. I think most Canadians understand that we have critical minerals in Canada, but perhaps the appreciation for how very blessed we are relative to other countries is relatively unknown. And we've had governments at all levels who have been opposed to various mining developments and the like, or if they do approve, it takes many years. So for this committee, for the purposes of this committee and looking at a defence industrial policy, could you give us a bit more information on why it is critical that we take our natural resources in the mineral sector seriously and move more quickly to develop those resources?
Yes, thank you for the question. So it's obvious that we're in a geopolitical era that is more marked by conflict and by tension and possible outright conflict. And we see Russia invaded NATO airspace, this week, last week, the week before. And it feels like we're getting closer to conflict. The U.S. Secretary for War just invited all the generals to D.C. to warn them to prepare for war. And how we won wars in the past is by having a better defense manufacturing base, by being able to produce more and outcompete and outlast the competition. And we have, in the last 20 years, very much globalized supply chains, and China has absolutely been strategic in taking advantage of that and dominating some important supply chains that are essential for, they're critical, as we call them. And anyways, we at least need to focus on being able to be independent in our defense manufacturing base, that we cannot allow China, number one, but other adversaries also, to control what we can produce and to hamper that production. So that's why we need to act with some urgency here and to make sure that and not a lot of our NATO allies have the ability to do that, but Canada does.
Thank you. And my understanding is while we have the raw materials, and of course we can do a much better job of ensuring we get them out of the ground, and that's a big asset, what we currently produce and what we could maximize for our allies, we don't put as much emphasis on, we export raw materials, but perhaps not as much efforts on creating the defense things out of those raw materials. Is that an accurate assessment, or are we doing sort of both things well, or overall just your assessment there? Yeah.
It was definitely accurate. I mean, our manufacturing has declined, as has almost every Western country's manufacturing base declined. But Canada has a competitive advantage in raw materials production. We should work with our allies to figure out what part of the process do we hand over materials, how processed, how refined they are, so they can put them into their manufacturing base in the short term. So you can't produce anything if you don't have the raw materials. That is one area where Canada can shine and make sure that it's at a stage where we can hand it over to allies and to their producers, and they can actually put it into materials.
Mm-hmm. And just, can you provide just some basic examples, so perhaps an everyday Canadian that may understand, yes, of course, there's things that go into these defense materials, but can you give us some examples of what Canada has and critical things for our defense procurement that we need, that it creates or contributes to?
Yeah, so quite a few. And I'll mention gallium and germanium because these are things that China has put export restrictions on recently. And they're actually byproducts of things we produce. So if you didn't know, we were big aluminum. I think we all know that now, producers. Gallium is a byproduct of that. And the market for gallium just wasn't very good. China kept prices very low. There was no incentive for anyone to turn that into a product. And so China developed an almost complete monopoly on gallium. Again, the market is very small and niche. It's not a lot of money, but you still need that, component to make things. Same with germanium, is a byproduct of zinc refining, which we do in Trail, BC. But again, the market was so small, there wasn't a lot of private sector incentive to compete with China on it. So it won't take a lot for Canada to, develop the things that we already have and to start processing them, develop the tech and develop the facilities to process them so that we can use it in our own supply chains. And
what sort of products would come out of that?
So, I mean, there's lots of lists. You can see that, the munitions, the materials like tungsten and bismuth that you need to make things hard. Obviously, every component of a battery. A lot of warfare now is being conducted through drones, and you need particular components for batteries for that and all the things that go into a battery, which China has dominated. And then aluminum. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're just building all these things, you need a ton of aluminum. And actually, NATO declares that a critical raw material material, even though we're having a hard time finding buyers for our aluminum in Canada right now with the tariffs. But you would hate to lose that capacity, because in the event of a conflict, you would need so much aluminum production to keep up.
Thank you very much for those examples. And you mentioned in your opening remarks, there are some, of course, we think of minings that they could take a very long time, certainly in this country, but you did allude to a few things that we could do relatively quickly. I think you mentioned mines that have been shut down formerly and we could reopen. Could you just provide more detail on what we could do in the next, say, 2 years to move in the right direction?
Yeah, so some of it, like germanium and gallium, it's just refining the byproduct that we already have and developing some capacity to do so. For some things like tungsten, antimony, we could do more cobalt, where again, we're already a minor producer and we could just expand the production that we already have. I think the last DPA award was for a tungsten mine in New Brunswick, Sisson mine. And so it's, we know where all these things are. In some cases, they were shut in production in the 80s or 90s because of competition from China. They just became uncompetitive with global commodity prices. And so there are some things that, the resource is still good, the deposit is so good, and we just need to go back in and start producing it and have a price of the commodity where it makes sense for someone to do that. Someone has to buy it at the end of the day.